Hi folks, paper wasn't the only thing that Richard Allen was eating in prison. He was also eating his own poop. His defence team, hot on the heels of Judge Francis Gull granting Nick McClelland access to his mental health records, have acknowledged a ton of prison confessions and have asked in a court filing for them to be suppressed for a number of reasons. I will keel over in shock if Gull even has a hearing for this. I expect it to be denied without a hearing. This video and the words used on your screen coming up here is what Allen's defence team have said in this motion to suppress. It's not my thoughts or opinions. If you see anything in light green text, that's me. And the headings, that's me also. But everything else in white text is lifted directly from the court filings and is the words of Richard Allen's defence team. They have cited lots of case law and gave lots of exhibits to support what they said, and some of the quotes they use is from people like the Westville prison warden. Also, if you see any text that is in bold, italics or underscored, that is me. It wasn't like that in the court documents. That is just me highlighting certain pieces of information. I will link the 3 full documents down below in the description and in the pinned comment, but I'm going to go over most of it here, all the important stuff, and try to rearrange it and lay out the story. Here is what this video covers: the motion to suppress and some of Richard Allen's confessions, how and why he was sent to Westville prison, is this normal, Richard Allen and his history with depression, was there a mental health assessment, what part of Westville prison was he housed in, Richard Allen's cell conditions, logs of Allen's actions, statements and behaviours by convicts and officers, companions and a prison officer praying with Richard Allen, when Richard Allen leaves his prison cell and meetings with his attorneys, Richard Allen's exercise, Cathy Allen's visit to Richard in prison, the prison officer who had odin patches tased Richard Allen, Richard Allen's November 2022 to April 2023 weight loss. Quote, Allen's medications were being adjusted by the prison medical team. And last but not least, Richard Allen eating his poop and other behaviours. So first off, the motion and some of Richard Allen's confessions. They are asking for the court to suppress as evidence in this case any and all oral and written communications, confessions, statements or admissions alleged to have been made by defendant Allen during his pre-trial detention in this case. What do they want? They want the court to conduct a pre-trial hearing to determine if the statements alleged to have been given were voluntary in nature, and they want to suppress as evidence in this case any and all communications, confessions, statements or admissions, written or oral, made by him subsequent to his arrest in this case. Allen's attorneys have conducted depositions, watched video from Allen's cell and other video from within the prison, reviewed prison records regarding Allen's detention, reviewed Allen's medical and psychiatric records, and listened to audio interviews of prison inmates and guards conducted by law enforcement officials. Throughout this process, Allen's attorneys have learned that Allen has been accused of making incriminating statements to both inmates and guards. Nearly all of these statements appear to have occurred between mid-March of 2023 and June of 2023. During this time frame, there also exists medical/psychiatric records suggesting that Allen was in a state of psychosis. On one occasion, Allen confessed to molesting those 2 young girls and shooting them in the back. This was to a prison inmate. And on another occasion, he professed his sorrow for molesting Abby and Libby and others who he specifically named, and this was to a correction officer. These facts are known to be falsities, none of which are supported by the autopsy findings by Dr. Roland Kaur as to the cause of death of the girls, and unsupported by the absence of evidence that either one of the girls was sexually assaulted near or before the time of their death, and they attached the autopsy reports. How and why was he sent to Westville prison? 5 days after Richard Allen was charged, November 3rd, 2023, The Carroll County Sheriff, and that was Tobe Lesenby, petitioned the court for an order transferring jurisdiction of Allen's custody from the Carroll County Sheriff to the Indiana Department of Corrections. On the same day, and without the formality of a hearing on the sheriff's request, Judge Benjamin Diener, same guy, signed an order, a safekeeping order, transferring Allen's custody to the IDOC without Allen or his legal representatives having any input into his pre-trial detainment. Is this normal? Allen's attorneys are unaware of any other pre-trial detainee that has ever been housed in the WCU in the history of the facility, and most certainly not in 5 or so years preceding his placement. Richard Allen and his history with depression. Allen has also battled depression throughout most of his adult life. He was medicated over the course of his life and in fact has sought out therapeutic resources to treat and manage his depression. The IDOC gave very little consideration to Allen's condition at the time of his intake and initial incarceration in the WCU, especially given the unusual circumstances in which he was detained. It is also believed that Allen's medications were administered in less than consistent fashion while he was on the unit, all of which have contributed to his inability to endure his living environment during his pre-trial detention at the WCU. Was there a mental health assessment? It does not appear that Allen underwent any formal mental health assessment or testing to establish a baseline in terms of his mental health history or needs. So what part of Westville prison was he housed in? The WCU, what's that about? Allen was then shipped off to Westville Correction Facility and placed in the maximum security segregation unit referred to by prison officials as WCU. From approximately the 15th of November 2022 through to December of 2023, Allen remained incarcerated in the WCU. Prison records reflect that Allen was placed on suicide watch during the majority of his stay at the WCU, including upon his initial detention in November of 2022. This occurred despite the fact there was no underlying findings to suggest that he was suicidal. Allen's designation as suicidal subjected him to even harsher circumstances than those of other offenders on the unit. For example, Allen's bed consisted of a metal plate with a tin mattress, all of which was just a few inches from a concrete floor. Allen was issued an anti-suicide smock that covered his body no better than that of a garment of a caveman. Allen's food was served to him through a cuff bottle, and his dining habits involved him sitting on his bed or on the floor, as his cell was not equipped with a table or chair that would otherwise serve as a rudimentary dining arrangement. Allen's cell also contained a steel toilet and sink, both in direct line of sight of the inmates and guards assigned to his surveil. The toilet bowl is located approximately 24 inches from his bed. Allen's attorneys learned that Allen was not only under constant surveillance, but that the lights remained on in his cell for many days and nights. It is also true that due to his watch designation, he was afforded less or no recreation time and less of an opportunity for showers. As evidence of this, they've attached audio from a correction officer. In essence, his suicide was the cause for the removal of additional privileges to the extent the word privilege even applies, which in turn further fostered an environment that led to the deterioration of Allen's mental and physical health. In all, for nearly 13 months at the WCU, Allen was deprived of any social interaction, very little to no privacy, limited recreation time, and was left to entertain himself. Logs of Allen's actions, statements and behaviours by convicts and officers. Allen's defence team has learned that Allen was not only detained in an isolation cell in the WCU, but that prison officials chose to post inmates at Allen's cell door and required the inmates to keep logs of all Allen's actions, statements and behaviours. This appears to have occurred during all hours of the day and continued over the course of much of Allen's stay at the WCU. These inmates, all of whom were convicted felons, were not only actively engaged in surveilling Allen's activities, but they were also communicating with him from time to time. Alan's attorneys have also learned that at some point in early April of 2023, prison officials deliberately pulled the inmates from Alan's cell door and replaced them with prison guards. Alan's attorneys have learned that this appears to have been prompted by an inmate or inmates engaging Alan regarding his pending charges and communicating Alan's thoughts and words to the families of those inmates, thereby violating any sense of confidentiality that might exist within the walls of the penitentiary. Companions and prison officers praying with Richard Allen. So what was Companions about? Almost simultaneous with Alan's isolation for human contact, prison companions were placed at his doorstep and tasked with the duty of reporting his every move and recording his every word. These companions appear to have gone above and beyond this duty by communicating with Alan about this case and even praying with him as he struggled to withstand the rigours of his incarceration. See audio statement of guard Michael Roberts, minute 38. When Richard Allen leaves his prison cell and meets with his attorneys. Unfortunately, Richard Allen's unusual detention circumstances would extend beyond the door of his isolation cell. Whenever Allen was removed from the confines of his 12x8 steel and concrete box, aka cell, he was shackled with ankle cuffs, a belly chain, box cuffs on his hands, and guided around by guards with a lead, or what most people refer to as a leash. As if this restriction on his basic freedom of movement was not enough, prison officials assigned a videographer to Allen to record his movements around the prison, including when he would meet with his lawyers. During all the meetings between Allen and his attorneys, he remained shackled, making simple tasks difficult, such as drinking water from a water bottle. Allen would not be able to communicate as much as hand gestures due to his shackled state. During other meetings, prison officials placed video cameras outside of the window in the visitation room and required Allen to sit on a hard plastic chair directly in line with the video camera, which was less than 10 feet away. Richard Allen's exercise. Allen's healthiest accommodations came in the form of recreational time not to exceed 4 hours per week. In this space, there was not enough room to jog or run, only an exercise bike and a pull-up bar. Carrie Allen's visit to Richard in prison. Allen's highly unusual detention circumstance extended even to visits from his wife. During one visit, Allen was transported outside of the WCU to a building reserved for visitation for those inmates in general population. Allen again was shackled and confined during the transport and ultimately re-robed into a green jumpsuit before seeing his wife. He was, however, unshackled during the visit. His embrace with his wife was controlled by prison protocol, which permitted only a few brief seconds of contact, despite the fact that Allen has not seen his wife for the better part of 6 months. Allen was required to sit on the opposite side of the table from his wife and had 2 prison guards standing within earshot on each end of his table. They were left with absolutely no privacy. The room was completely empty except for his lawyers and a few other prison guards who were also stationed within the building. This provided no background noise whatsoever, which might offer up some aspect of privacy as he and his wife tried to communicate. And his restrictions did not end here. Allen and his wife were also denied the simple concession of getting a drink of water during this visit, despite the fact there was a number of vending machines and a water fountain within 10 to 20 feet from his table. Prison officer who had odin patches tased Richard Allen. Allen's lawyers also discovered that at least 2 guards assigned to his pod and or his movements around the facility also held themselves out to be affiliated with the pagan Norse god known as Odin. See affidavits of Joshua Robinson and Randy Jones. They're the 2 prison guards. The guards proudly displayed their Odinistic beliefs on their own prison uniforms, despite the fact that such a display was in direct violation of their uniform policy. And on at least one occasion, one of those guards tased Allen after he was placed into his secure 12x8 cell because Allen refused to remove his hands from the cuff port in the door of his cell. Cuff port that is barely large enough to slide a meal tray through. Basically, Allen posed absolutely no risk to anyone at the time he was tased. Richard Allen's weight loss. Allen's intake records with the IDOC reflect that he was 5 foot 5 inches tall and £170 at admission in November of 2022. His weight by April of 2023 had dropped to below £135. Alan's medications were being adjusted by the prison medical team. All of this occurred while Alan's medications were being adjusted by the prison medical team. The combination of which factors reduced him to nothing more than a human experiment. And last but not least, Richard Allen eating his poop and other behaviours. Allen endured longer, more sustained form of interrogation. This is in reference to a case that they were citing, one that lasted more than 5 months before he was finally broken, already suffering from bona fide mental health disorder and then having been cut off from the moral support of his wife, mother and daughter. Interesting arrangement there. Allen has weakened to the point where he has slipped into a state of psychosis plagued with grossly disorganised, delusional, paranoid and highly dysfunctional behaviour. These behaviours were manifested through verbal confessions that he may have been drugged, verbal confessions to the double homicide inconsistent with the known facts about the crime scene, periods of not sleeping for days, paranoia, stripping off his clothes, drinking toilet water, covering himself with and eating his own feces, and many other socially unacceptable behaviours. And that's it. That's the defence's motion summed up. I was very sceptical about these confessions when they first came out. I made a video about it back then. I still am. I'm very interested to know about the other confessions, the letters. Apparently, he wrote a letter to the prison warden, and apparently he told some medical staff about the motive. If the motive isn't SA, I'd be very interested to know what it was. And I hope that Nick isn't hanging his hat on this, because if I was on a jury watching a man eat his own shit, I would be empty retching, gagging very loudly in the courtroom. I can't control my reaction to some things, and a man eating his own poop is definitely one of them. Maybe that's the move for jury selection for the defence. Try to get people on that jury who have weak stomachs and maybe weak bladders also, because that might help when it comes to trying to explain Richard Allen's movements and why people didn't see him. Let me know your thoughts. Please give this video a like, share it with someone if you found any value, and subscribe. Good luck, God bless. I hope everyone has a nice day.